Hey, I'm Joe with Joe Red Studios. Today I'm going to show you how I took this blank wall and turned it into a fireplace with a black walnut mantle and electric insert. Check it out.
Alright, so this project has been on my to-do list pretty much since we moved into the house, but the nature of it wasn't exactly pressing by any means. I wanted to do a fireplace to give our front room some definition. I found this black walnut mantle about a year and a half ago or so at an antique mall, and I've just been holding on to it, waiting until I was finally ready to go ahead and knock this one out. So just looking at it, taking the measurements, seeing the narrowest point, the widest points, trying to figure out how much overall I can yield. As this thing is super rough, I think it was milled back in like 1988, so it's been sitting for a while. So just to get an idea what's going on, started just going through the whole milling process, running it through the joiner on one face, and then using that face as a reference edge to get a nice square edge, and just going from there. Once I was done joining, it's time to start planing. So just to get that top face parallel, now I'm only removing the minimum amount of material possible. I'm trying to keep this mantle as thick as I can. Like I said, I don't want it to have too small of a mantle. I am doing a floor to ceiling fireplace build. So once 3 faces were good, ran it through the table saw to clean up that 4th side. Now I was able to really take a good look at the mantle and get an idea of what I was working with. Now that I had a good idea what I was working with and everything was cleaned up, I can go ahead and square up the ends. So squaring up one end, and then from there I'll be able to go and cut it down to just longer than final length. I want to give myself a little room as there's a couple cracks on one end that I want to take care of. Fortunately, the track saw just doesn't have the depth I need, so I do make 2 passes going all the way to the full plunge depth for this saw, and then I'll be able to come through with a flush cut saw and lop off the rest of it. I'm not trying to cut it exactly flush. I'll come back with a router here in a second. And by a second, I mean right now. So just chucked up a spiral compression flush trim bit, and that quickly squared up the end, so now it is all the exact same. Next on our to-do list, go ahead and take care of these knots and cracks. We're going to be using some black dyed epoxy. So to help prevent any staining in the wood, we're going to go ahead and seal the edges around it with some shellac. Now this is just going to help prevent staining, make our lives a little bit easier when it comes time to sand. So just put it along the edge, and then I'm going to be using liquid glass deep pour epoxy. I believe this one's a 2-to-1 ratio. So I'd already mixed it up, and then now I'm going to go ahead and add some black dye and continue to mix it thoroughly. Since I didn't need a whole lot of epoxy, some packing tape worked well to dam the other end of this knot that went through, and then on the edge itself there was just a small crack. So pouring it in, letting it sink through the log, and then kept coming back and refilling as needed. This stuff does shrink up a little bit, so it's definitely a good idea to pour it proud. With our mantle set aside for that epoxy to cure, let's go ahead and turn our attention to the actual frame for the fireplace. Now I'm just using some 2x4s, a circular saw, and a square to go ahead and get everything put together. Now, I am not a contractor, never been a professional contractor. I can barely say I know what I'm doing, but I can do a basic frame. This isn't structural by any means, but it will be very secure to the walls, and I'll make sure to have plenty of mounting points for the cleats. But basically I'm framing it out. I think I did 16-inch on center. I might have done even a little bit closer. But the real determining thing for the face size of the studs was the width of my fireplace. So if you're going to be doing an electric insert or any kind of fireplace insert, obviously that opening needs to be big enough. I just took the measurements directly from the fireplace itself. This way I know it's going to fit, and I'm doing plenty of test fitting in between takes, making sure that it's actually going to work. Before I got too far into the framing process, I wanted to make sure that everything actually fit, my measurements were right. So I brought both side pieces and the front and side, gave myself a little more drywall work to do, and then kept carrying on and getting everything lined up. Now that we know exactly where we want our fireplace, we just need to go ahead and mark and cut away the baseboard. So quickly mark it. I'm going to leave it a little bit wider of the frame since we're going to be adding the stone later on, and then using a multi-tool to go ahead and cut the face itself. Now before you go ahead and pull away any of these baseboards, you definitely want to make sure you score it with a razor or a pocket knife, whatever you have, so that way you're not pulling away the drywall when you go ahead to pull the baseboards away, because you're just going to create a lot of work later. In this scenario, it wouldn't matter. It's never going to be seen again, but in general, it's a good practice to have. So since we can finally get this thing pushed all the way up against the wall, it's time to go ahead and secure it to the wall. So taking some 2x that are span the width, sandwich them in there, and then I'm gonna toe these in, and then I'm gonna go ahead with the stud finder and mark out all my studs. I believe there was 3 for each section, so that way I can drive some nice long 3.5-inch screws through them to really snug this thing up to the wall. With everything secure, it's time to go ahead and just finish framing this thing out. So I put the fireplace insert in itself. This way I can know exactly where that top stud needs to land and send a couple screws to each side to hold it in place. In order to make sure that I had plenty of holding power for that mantle bracket, I took about these leftover 2x8s, cut them down to width, and then screwed them into the studs. This will give me plenty of fine tunability when it comes time to hang that mantle bracket. And then I just went and finished the rest of the framing out. I also added this vertical piece that is going to connect the top to the center mantle piece. This way, if I ever want to decide to add a TV mount or if I had a heavy picture frame, I know I've got a solid piece behind all that material that I will be able to screw into. Since 2x material is never straight, I decided to just take the sheeting to the piece itself, clamped it in place while I struck my lines, and marked out where the fireplace insert needed to go. Then I can just take it over to the garage and rip it down with the track saw. Now, you don't need a track saw for this. A circular saw or jigsaw would work perfectly well. You're not going for precision, but definitely developed a little bit of OCD from woodworking. So here we are, striving for perfection anyways, when it really doesn't matter in this case. And after each piece was cut out, obviously I brought it back into the fireplace, and then I just attached it with some screws. I clamped it in place just so it wouldn't move while I was getting everything set up. And I just worked my way up the front and the sides, and before you know it, this thing was fully covered. Didn't take but maybe a couple hours to get everything all done and secure. With everything sheeted, it was time to go ahead and focus back on the mantle itself. So the bracket I ordered came in. I also did end up ordering the drilling guide and routing guide. Just didn't feel like messing with it too much, and I was trying to get the holes as straight as possible. I didn't order these all at the same time. I ordered them sporadically, so this project definitely got drug out between that and all the other things that I had lined up for the end of the year. So just took my time, went through, drilled all the holes. Once everything was drilled out, took a compression bit and just started hogging out material. I wasn't too precise on this just because it's for me. No one's ever gonna see it unless you decide to pull down my hard work, which if you're doing that, what the heck, man? Didn't do a good job? You don't like it, man? Be a lot cooler if you did. But once that was all routed and cleaned up, did a couple test fits with the bracket before going inside to place it on the fireplace. Mounting the bracket itself was pretty simple. Just make sure to mark each end so I know exactly where it's supposed to be, make sure it's centered, and then using a level, went ahead and screwed it in before going back and adding all the additional screws. But now to the fun part. So we're finally going to be able to face this thing. I'm going to be using these pre-cut stones. I think they're 6-inch by 24-inch long marble. They are an Arctic white. I got these over at the Orange Box store. And then to attach it, instead of doing mortar or making all that kind of mess, and since I was going to be doing this over the next few days in stages, I'm going to be using liquid nails Fuse It. This stuff is meant for stone masonry. This stuff can pretty much be applied to anything. Now to cut the tiles, all I needed was an angle grinder and then a diamond tooth blade. And I did these all as dry cuts. You can definitely use a wet saw. Didn't feel like renting one, especially since I was going to need it for a few days. The cost just didn't make sense when I had everything else I needed. So I used just a square to mark a line with my Sharpie, and then just carefully scored it, took my time, went back and forth, keeping the edges straight as possible, and then just work your way up. I did find better results going ahead and putting the liquid nail on the sheeting itself, and then I was able to place the pieces and press them down. And then here and there, when needed, I did backfill it a little bit extra, just since these pieces are not flat on the back. Lots of gaps and voids as it is all natural cut stone. And when it came to positioning the end pieces, I just kept a little scrap offcut in my little tool pouch, so that way I could line it up and make sure that I had the overhang I wanted. I would rather the front overhang the sides than the sides come up flush with the face, so that way any gaps that I have are going to be on the sides that I'll be able to come back and fill later on, versus having them stare you right in the face when you're looking down straight at the fireplace. As I worked my way up, I quickly realized I needed to go ahead and finish the mantle. So back out to the garage, took a break from all that marble dust to go back do some wood dust. sanded everything up to grit. I also took this time to use some black CA glue to fill any little bug holes and imperfections that I didn't like. Then, just to soften all the edges, I took an 1/8 inch round over to all the faces of the mantle. After that, I just needed to prep for finish, so using a compressor, blew out all the grain, and then I came through with a tack cloth and wiped everything down to get any dust off. I'm going to be using Rubio Monocoat Walnut for this one. Had it on hand already. I really like the way it unifies the sapwood with the regular heartwood of the walnut, and then I like the dark rich color it gives it without having to amber the wood itself. So just like you've seen in the other videos, buffing and scrubbing it in with a white Scotch-Brite pad, letting it sit for 15-20 minutes, and then buffing it off with a clean towel until it is pretty much not really dry, but until it stops coming off. After all the finish was applied and it had dried for a couple of days, I realized I didn't like the way it looked with all that sapwood. The face of the mantle just wasn't uniform, it was kind of blotchy, so I decided to pivot. And by pivot, I went ahead and ripped a 45-degree chunk off the front, hoping to expose some more heartwood or just a more satisfying face of the mantle. That didn't really happen, so I ended up resawing some thin strips of other air-dried walnut I had laying around, applied that, and then went and refinished it. And this ended in a much more uniform finish, and honestly, I'm glad I ended up going this way because I really think it came together nicely. Unfortunately, I didn't film it. Once that was all said and done and the finish had a couple days to cure, it wasn't fully cured, but it was good enough that I could keep working. So brought it out to the fireplace and then slid it right into place and gave it a few taps with the mallet. To protect the mantle itself, I went and wrapped the soft end of my mallet in a few layers of blue painter's tape and then grabbed a nice thick microfiber cloth that I could use to go ahead and tap it into place without actually marring the mantle, which would have sucked, especially once it was wedged to the wall, because like I said, not at all easy to get this back off the wall, especially when I was doing test fits. Let me tell you, these people from Ultra Shelf make a secure bracket. It took me a good 30 minutes to get it off the one time when I fully seated it like a dingus before I was ready to actually do so. It also seemed like a good time to go ahead and finish the fitment for the fireplace insert itself. So just lining everything up, seeing if there's any points that needed to be trimmed, and then going ahead and removing a little bit by bit. Took a good 10-15 minutes or so to do. Wasn't anything crazy. I just used a rough file, and then I also had a multi-material bit in my multi-tool that I was also able to chip away small sections as needed. But all that little fitment and fine-tuning is absolutely worth it. The reveal I got was dang near perfect for me. Super happy with it. And with everything installed, we can go ahead and finish doing this stone. The top half of the mantle went much quicker. There wasn't a lot of little fine tunes and fine cuts to make, just a couple towards the end, and then obviously cutting everything to length. So just like before, liquid nail, lay your piece, rinse, repeat. Once you find yourself in a groove, things do seem to come together really quick between just making your cuts and then going ahead and placing them inside. Definitely a lot of steps, and I created a huge mess on my floor. Next time I'm definitely getting some floor coverings just for all the little stone bits that fall on the floor. And I've got the vinyl planking, so it is pretty durable, but it was a lot of cleanup when everything was all said and done. So keep that in mind as you see how much dust is getting kicked up here. Filling in the side pieces was actually pretty easy, so I'd have a short off-cut piece, and then I would take a longer piece, get everything fitted and lined up, and then just use a black Sharpie to mark where it needed to go, strike that line with a square, and then go back outside and cut it down. As long as you marked and measured correctly, and you also cut along your line, you should have a nice tight fit, and then you just work your way up. For the top pieces, instead of trying to scribe them and mess with all of that, I just measured 2 to 3 different points depending on the length of the piece, and then marked those out on the stone itself. This allowed for a really tight fit. I did leave a little over 1/16 inch of a gap just to give me any clearance with the ceiling in case there was a low point or a high point. Again, pretty simple, just taking your time, marking it out. The long cuts definitely take a little bit longer with the angle grinder and kick up a whole lot more dust, so just be patient. Don't try to rush it. It is brittle. It will crack and snap, and then you're gonna have to start over. So just don't do that. With that last little piece in place, all we had to do was fill any gaps or voids with this sanded caulking. This is also Arctic White. It matches the stone color itself. Now I only use this in the spots where there's a gap bigger than my liking, and then also on the sides since the backside of these stones is not flat, just to fill any gaps or voids. This went pretty quick, applied it on, and then I just used a damp rag to kind of work it in and then wipe off all the excess. And with that, our fireplace is complete. Now this room that had no real defined space has a little bit more direction than it once did. I like giving credit to those who make it all the way to the end of my videos. So this week, go ahead and comment your favorite band or musician. That's gonna tell me that you made it all the way to the end.
Thanks again for watching. I really hope you guys enjoyed the video or at least got something useful out of it. Definitely make sure you like, comment, make sure you subscribe. I got a lot of stuff coming, everything from a beautiful black walnut dining table to a mid-century modern round table, and a whole lot of other stuff. So thanks again, and I'll see you guys next time. Just need to build some dang chairs. I'm gonna sit by this fireplace.